Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So hopefully we can talk a little bit about what Tristan did yesterday. We'll pick up from there and kind of move into more of an action stance. So we talk a lot about analytics, and we talk a lot about, well, we know that Bill or Sally or John is not doing well, but now what? Right? We spent a lot of time and effort trying to identify that we have a challenge. We talked about that yesterday. Who hasn't made a decision? Who hasn't picked a major or a meta major or an academic foci? I like that term. Now what? So that's really what I want to talk about today, is how do we take that learner analytics and that analysis and drive it into action? And how might you think about that? So I am a project director for the open source student success plan, and of course I will use that as my basis of experience to talk about this, but I want to try to make the conversation a little broader and try to paint a picture for you of how you might use an analysis to drive action on your own campuses. So with that, I'll get started. So anybody here not interested in success and completion? That's good. I think at this point in time, everybody is pretty well steeped in this, right? We need to be doing this, and this is what we're all about. And we want to implement these things, we want to manage them, and then we want to measure them. So one of the things that I worry about a lot is that we do a lot of things. We implement a lot of systems. We start a lot of new processes. Do those things work? How do we measure those things? And then how do we decide what to do more of or do less of? And as we talked about previously yesterday, we never kill things, right? We never stop doing stuff. So how do we measure things so that we know where to put our scarce resources? And then for me also, student success and the stuff we're going to talk about with IBAS, it's the right thing to do. You know, this is important to us from our funding perspective. It's important to us for growth and enrollment, but really it's about students and their lives. And it's really the right thing to do to make sure that they are successful and that they take this value forward in their life and make a better life for themselves and their families. Lastly and I think this is great, a great event, and this keys off of something I would try to encourage others to do, which is a collaborative bit. You have tremendous power coming together, benchmarking, talking to one another, sharing, especially with best practices. And we've had some conversations around SSP and trying to build some larger user groups and really getting the practitioners to talk to other practitioners and pick up best practices. And I encourage you all that as you go forth in this journey that you stay in touch and talk to one another, because there's tremendous power. So here in Florida even, our system is at 3 different campuses. And so that's a pretty good synergy already. And all of you around, you're all facing the same challenges. And the more you do like this is fantastic. So what is IBAS? How many of you have heard of IBAS before I said that term? Therein lies the problem. So the Gates Foundation, when they fund most of my work, so when they say, we're going to use this as the term, we said, yes, thank you. It started out as what we call learner relationship management. You can think of it like customer relationship management, except for very specifically targeted at success and completion. So this is EDUCAUSE's current definition for IBAS. And I've been doing quite a lot of work with them, with their ECAR group, and some of the other branches of EDUCAUSE, and trying to build space around IBAS. And there's a number of folks and vendors working around this, and the Gates Foundation has put out a lot of funding and grant programs around IBAS. So it's integrated planning and advising systems, or integrated planning and advising services, depending on which S you pick. So really it's about how do we take all these dissimilar things and put them in one system. And there's usually an advising system. There might be a coaching system. There might be an FA system. There might be an early alert system. But do you need 4 or 5 systems? Can you bundle that and cohesively use it so that you're driving value and not having people log into 18 different things or not seeing fractured silos? So that's the concept, is taking all of these supports and services that we have built electronically and trying to make them work together. That might be one single piece of software, or it might be 5 or 6 that have just been designed to interoperate in a more smooth and seamless way, working with your learning management or your student information system and other tools to build them together. So why does this matter? So I did some work with ECAR, and we have been doing some surveys of almost 40 schools and talking to their senior student success officers and their senior technical leaders, and describing what IBAS was, and then asking them how important these things were to them. So the top thing here is we're not
nationally doing that great job of graduating students. I don't think that's rocket science, right? We all know that. And we could all do better. So what do we need to do around that? And this IPASS idea kind of keyed over. So bringing together shared ownership. That's probably the most key thing here. So this is a slide out of the EDUCAUSE report, and I would suggest if you're interested in this, EDUCAUSE eCar, and because the Gates Foundation funded it, instead of having to have a membership to eCar, all of this information was made public, and all these reports are accessible without any kind of fee, which is a great thing. So it's all out there, and you can use it, and they were kind enough to give me permission to replicate their slides and be able to distribute them with my presentation so that you won't have to go out and find another one as well. So when we talk to those folks, how important is IPASS? And so the leadership, I think, really understands that these technologies are coming, and what are we going to do about it? So if you look down at just the bar chart there, degree audit and planning, advising, transfer, alerts, et cetera, and that shows you kind of where people, the dark bar is where people think they already have systems in place, and then the lighter bars that they are planning, and then even lighter are kept considered. And looking at that as an implementation, you can see at the bottom is really educational plans and tracking. And Tristan talked about yesterday that the importance of choice and kind of knowing where you're headed. And you can see we're the strongest at the top, which is very procedural, degree or audit, right? This is a subtractive process. How many credits do you have? How many credits do you have remaining? What is the sum balance? And so we've done better there, but believe it or not, a lot of colleges still don't have a degree audit system. And it's not in their mix yet. And moving down. 3 out of 4 think that this is going to increase a lot. And probably the most important thing for us when we did these, no one out of the 70-some leaders plus their staff that we talked to, no one said it was going to decrease. Does anybody think that the student success tool business is going to decrease in the next 5 years? All right, so that's why we're here. This stuff is important. So this is how I conceptualize the IPASS ecosystem, and this is IPASS according to Russ, so you can ignore this, but this is how I see the world. So learner analytics is really at the top, and I've just come from UMUC, as Vicki was talking about, and saw Dr. Wall present on the great things that St. Pete's doing, which was really exciting to listen to him give this address and talk about this and sit in the audience and be like, yay, because he was talking about the early alert piece and talking about how critical that was to them, so that was fantastic. But people, processes, and systems are what drive the data or create data. And if you think about that, we have data around people, demographics, and people input data. And those processes, your application for admission, your non-cognitive instruments, your early alerts, and the systems. So things like what Tristan has done with predictive analytics or modeling in the background, triggers, alerts. And those 3 different domains create the data that becomes the space we call learner analytics. And learner analytics is still kind of nebulous and undefined, but it's really the analytics about the learner. It's a little different. I think Kyle will probably talk this afternoon more about academic analytics and what's going on in the learning environment, and how people learn. And this is more about you, the learner, and what do we know about you and how can we support you. So all of that together then drives different processes typically. We have things like early alert, which now I see in big pictures kind of hard to read, but dashboards. How many of you have dashboards of information about your students in some respect? A few, okay. But this is just information we already have, and we're presenting it. Maybe it's been crunched a little. What is the success rate? But we're still not driving action. We're just surfacing information. Student self-help. How many of you have modules where students can go in and do things for themselves? I'm guessing most of those are things like registration systems. But how do you get them to deal with overcoming barriers and challenges? And that's much more rare, which is why we only have a few things. For me, the next step down would be case management. And some people hear that term and shy away from it and like, oh, we can't, but conceptually, the idea that we're going to do this as a holistic thing instead of as an event. That we're going to know about this student and not take the same actions from different perspectives and maybe step on one another's toes as they move from campus to campus or department to department. So then we get more prescriptive. How many of you do prescriptive advising? How many of you tell your students what to do and then monitor them and make them stay doing it?
Again, a small number. So Dr. Denley talked about that yesterday and the importance, and you saw his graph on the impacts of having a decision and having people have clear pathways and understanding what's next and what they'll be successful with. So then we have student coaching. How many of you do coaching? Same hands. Coaching can mean a lot of things, and this could also be kind of the faculty-student relationship and faculty advising. And different schools have different things. You have faculty advisors, you have professional advisors, etc. But we're also using some level of information to help our students. And the more information we have, the better relationship management we have, the more powerful and impactful those relationships are with our students. Finally, intrusive interventions. These are more the early alerts. I find out that Bill's not doing well, and I call Bill. I go find Bill. I send Bill an email, but I track Bill down and help him. This is a little different than some systems where we say, by the way, Bill, you're not doing well. I think if Bill failed his first test, he probably knows that. So in some ways, surfacing that data is nothing but to reinforce the fact that he hasn't done well in class. So there's some different strategies here, right? So intrusive really means we're going to go out and take action specifically, not just surface data or not just push things passively with email. So the last piece, and the most important thing we'll probably talk about, is action, measurement, and finding, and how you report that. So reporting to me is just a tool. Reports, if what you want is reports, you have to ask yourself why. A report is not an end state. A report is a tool so that you can do something better. So if you're focused on creating great reports, that's probably the wrong focus. The focus should really be on creating a great report because it's going to drive specific actions. And if you're not using the reports to drive those actions, probably doesn't make sense to spend the resources to build the reports. I mean, there is some cart and horse there where you have to have some data insights to understand where to fix things. But I think sometimes we focus so much on getting the charts and the dials and making it pretty, and we don't focus enough on saying, gosh, we really need to change our orientation. Or, wow, we need to rebuild our application for admission because we didn't collect this, or we didn't push this service. Instead of just looking at the report and going, enrollment's down. That isn't going to help. Now, enrollment's down, let's hire 3 new recruiters. That's an action. So that's the outcome. And so when I talk about this from measurement, you should be measuring the things you want to improve. And if we're not taking action, it's just navel gazing, right? It's just. So also, if you're not feeding your measurement back into how you define your learn analytics, and then also using that to inform your people, processes, and systems, you're missing great opportunity. So sometimes we keep measuring things, but we never change the inputs. Does this happen to anybody? So, yeah. Somebody said my name somewhere? No? All right. So if we're not measuring these, and then we're not refining, you've all heard like plan, do, study, act, and there's so many variations on that kind of cyclical model, and that's really true. So why would you want to do this? And I'm not going to read the slide, but I think the most important thing, and I think at this point, this is probably preaching to the choir, everybody wants better graduation rates, et cetera, et cetera. The systematic, comprehensive advising, counseling, and coaching. How many of you feel like you have a firm grasp that what a student receives in every single office across campus has some level of consistency? Or if they move from North Campus to West Campus or South Campus, that they're getting the same thing? Anybody confident that that happens? That's fantastic.
We have an integrated system, so it does travel across campus.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to talk about. And do you find great value in that?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I didn't even plan very long. So this is the value of an iPath system, integrated, right? So different team members, faculty, staff, coaches, students, all working together to help that student move forward. How many times have you ever heard, or in your own student careers, where somebody in one office told you something that contradicted with somebody in another office? And then they made you the conduit of information for the student? You go tell financial aid. I said, right? Why don't we own that as institutions, that communication? Why would we ever say to a student, You are the messenger, you are the system, you are the data repository. Tell the chair that I am advising that told you to do this. In hindsight, that seems odd, but that's the way we've done business for a very long time. So one of the things we'll talk about is getting systematic, and how do we understand this? How do we have insight into what is actually happening? What are people actually advising? What do the processes really look like? Are we encouraging people to use the same and consistent processes? And creating plans of action. And plans of action sometimes be thrown around. People say, well, we have academic planning. And that means the same and different to many people. And what I mean is that some people say academic planning means courses, right? So others, it's courses and sequence. Others, it's courses, sequence, and specific term. And to yet others, it's entirely non-cognitive. It's how to deal with transportation and childcare and finances and testing center. I would suggest that it's all of those things. If you don't have a plan for all of those pieces, you're not really going to be as successful. Your ability to do linear equations to get through algebra so that you can have it and not use it like Tristan said, and use it when your kids are in school. But if you can't get to school because your transmission fell out of your car, it has nothing to do with your academic ability, but it's just as detrimental, even more so in some cases. Life happens. If I don't have childcare, you've got a single mom with 3 kids and she's working, and the only time she can take this class is in the evening, and you don't happen to offer this class online. Have to come to campus. Now, if we can't find childcare, this is a education in the moment, and has nothing to do with their academic ability. It has to do with packaging the whole thing. So even if we had the perfect sequence of courses, we still have to have these other pieces. Perhaps the last piece here, Dr. McClenny at the University of Texas is often quoted as saying students don't do optional. We've drank this Kool-Aid. They really don't. And when they waffle and explore, and I know some folks are really in love with the idea of students coming and finding themselves in that classic liberal arts education. The truth is they want more prescription than we give them. They really want us to tell them, and we get all things like, oh, we can't tell them they have to come to orientation. Turns out to students, if you just say orientation's Tuesday, you have to come, and they go, okay. You know, we got rid of late registration a number of years ago, and this was kind of a scary idea. Enrollment will plummet. You know, if we stop enrolling people a week before the term, you know, cut off enrollment, gosh, things will just go disastrously bad. But it was all our aims. The students didn't miss a beat. We just told them what the new dates were, and they went, okay, and enrollment didn't drop at all. They didn't, we hadn't set their expectation yet, so we were making judgments off our expectations, not understanding that they were coming to us, and we were setting their expectation on the way in, and whatever we set was what they accepted. And so sometimes we take our own baggage into these decisions, and we could get over that. So I want to talk about the student success plan. It is open source, which does mean there is no license cost, but it's free like a puppy. Right? Everything has a cost. I don't want anybody to go away thinking, oh, I'm going to take this home, I'm going to install it, and everything's going to be great, retention's going to go up. Well, everything's got a cost, either in time or money, and we have a group of vendors and professional support organizations. We have one in the audience, Scott Kramer from Encourse, and a number of others that will provide sales, services, and support and solutions around this to be able to deal with the training and implementation, data integration. You can also take it on and do it yourself. So it's really decide what you want to do and then go from there. So this is our kind of ecosystem. The money really came from EDUCAUSE, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, through the Next Generation Learning Challenges grant. But the Cliff Notes version is we've taken in about $2 million in the last 3 years to take this software that we developed at Sinclair over the last 10 years and make it into a product that we could deliver to all of you for free. So how does this thing work? Or how does the iPass concept work? Or at least how I envision it. And the problem is when you all went, like, how many of you know what iPass is? And you know, like 4 hands. How many of you know what an LMS is? Right. So this is where we want to be as iPass, right? We want people to understand and coalesce around some concepts and ideas. So what can this really mean? So to make an iPass system, we really have to find students. And that's really where the learner analytics piece comes in. So I've used the little LA thing there. So how do we do that? We use a lot of things, right? We decide, well, first time in college students we'll track, or first time in college students that aren't academically prepared, or any other number of things. diagnostic tools. You've got Smarter Measure and ETS and the Levitts and any others, and Grit and Hope and placement tests and ACTs and you name it, right? We assess people to death sometimes. We do specific intakes and surveys and all kinds of things. And then we also do stuff like predictive modeling or cut scores or things of that nature to find who we want to work with. That's really up to you and what fits for your situation. No one size fits all kind of thing. So once we've done that, we want to work with the students and be holistic, and we want to work together. So I'll show you how we use the dashboards and alerts and predictions to be able to drive action. And then we're going to journal and record what we've done, keep a history of what we've done. As the lady said, it drives tremendous value to know what your peers have said to a student. And then create individual plans of action. And then how we intervene when they start to wander or fail. So this student has started to come to class and sleep or hasn't bought the textbook. Data will never find that. So you need a combination of analytics as well as faculty engagement to let you know that students might be at risk, and being able to marry those two things together to give you the best insights into who to try to assist. Let me show you some examples from, maybe on the outside there, measurement and reporting and refinement. Right? If we're not using this stuff to drive our business processes back in, we're really missing opportunity. This is how you make real strides. And that's one of the things I'll say about the Sinclair numbers I'll show you. This is not in a vacuum. We didn't turn it on last year and see this jump. This is 10 years of being able to reflectively look at data, refine a process, do something new. Try something new, measure that, try something new. And so when I show you these numbers, I don't want any of you to think that I'm going to go home and I'm going to see a 40% jump in retention in this specific target group, because it doesn't work quite like that. It creates a scaffolding that you can use to measure yourself, benchmark, and improve your processes. The problem is most of us don't have insight into what we actually do. We have insight into what we think we do, but not what actually happens with students. And then we have very little measurement feedback to be able to evaluate which interventions or which strategies actually have return on investment, either in terms of process or finance. The other thing I will say before I go on and show you some of the numbers is the people are magic. The technology is a tool, right? All these predictive models and everything else are just nail guns versus a hammer. If you give me a nail gun, I'm likely to end up at urgent care, not build you a better house, right? You still have to have a fantastic carpenter to build you a nice custom home. You still need great faculty, advisors, coaches, to have those magic moments with students. That's where the magic happens, not in the technology. The technology creates a scaffolding so that you can have that value and not work at cross purposes, or so that you have better insights, or you have a better measurement scaffold to know which things in the relationship really matter. I say that because some people go away thinking, I'm going to buy the package, I'm going to get 8%, and don't worry about it. So we've been measuring this, and I'm going to show you one specific group, and it's easier to talk about data that way, because these systems can be used for many different cohorts on your campus, which is one of the tremendous values. But we do know that students that are managed in this more holistic way are much more likely to be successful, come back, and most importantly, to be graduate. So the group I'm going to talk about is called Pathways to Completion. This is our potentially most at-risk group. These are typically students in poverty and academically unprepared. Do you have any of these students? So, and in many cases, these students are in 2 dev eds, below the 100. This is a rough group for us, and almost 75% of our students are on some sort of financial assistance. At Sinclair. We're a large urban campus, about 24,000 students. So big comprehensive community college, but we have a lot of people come to us that are academically unprepared. The math remediation rates are just as bad or worse than any place else you can go, and the need to go through those kinds of things. So this is a real challenge. So the tools, case management, advising, early alerts, we want students to do some self-help, and we'll talk about this too. Because case management, one of the things we'll get pushback on is, that doesn't scale. You can't do that, it doesn't scale. I'm not sure I agree with that, because if you start sitting down and doing the math and put together some spreadsheets and the money you save and the revenue you generate for each one of these students that you retain, you start to figure out this stuff that is revenue positive pretty quick. And you can sit down with the CFO and say, yes, hiring 10 new coaches is expensive. But look, if we retain X number of more people, we will drive so much more state revenue and tuition dollars and subsidy. And it turns out you can make money by hiring people. Seems counterintuitive, right? But you can, because when you start realizing what the cost is to recruit people versus retain people, et cetera, but you have to have data to do all of that. And you have to have measurement, and you have to have processes. Otherwise, the CFO is going to say, you think if you hire 10 people? Go now. I have business to run. Stop, thank you. So with this Pathways to Completion group, and this is a 300-to-1 case model, it is intensive. And not every ratio fits. I'm not espousing that that's the perfect fit. You have to decide what your capacity is and how many students you have and what kind of services you can offer and figure that out. We want you to have a tool to be able to do that. This is a huge difference. So the 79% group is this group of at-risk students compared to the red column, they're 22. These are the students that were in the same category that didn't take our services. This is a profound difference. And if you look out to the right, that's first time in college. So it's, 40% retention is about norm for a lot of community colleges for the first year. So keeping these other at-risk students, and a lot of it's to do with the value of the human relationship. I know your name, Jennifer. I have a connection to the college, but Jennifer can't manage 300 students at a time without better tools. And then if Jennifer's not here, and I go see Wanda, if Wanda can't pick up where Jennifer left off, then she also can't manage her 300 plus Jennifer's 300 while she's in Aruba drinking Mai Tais on the beach, right? And then when Jennifer comes back, if Wanda hasn't documented her stuff and Jennifer can't see it, then she's lost all that value, and then we really can't deal with that scale. So it's about the human moment, but the technology allows that to really happen. This is all, and we'll tread into culture. These projects are more about culture than they are tech, and in a big way. And I'm a tech guy, but that's true. My part is easier than your part. Tristan talked about this yesterday too. We see that these kinds of systems have an asymmetric impact on minority students. Notice they're 84% retention, 79% retention, 84% retention, meaning the minority students outperformed the larger group when applied with these types of case management techniques. It impacted the minority students in a more positive way than it did all students. Right? And Tristan said the same thing yesterday. They saw the closing of the gap, and that the improvement was even better in these targeted populations. This is why I still want to do this after a decade, more than a decade. And 6 years is still too long, but 5 times higher graduation rates for this population, this targeted population that we're really following and taking care of, using the data and these processes to drive and measure. This makes me smile, right? This makes me feel good about what I do at work. These are people that are going to take away a credential for a lifetime. This is value they will have, instead of representing people that we've sent away with more debt, or people that have invested 2 or 3 years with us and now have walked away with nothing, at least from a credential perspective. And unfortunately, like Tristan said yesterday, we award things based on the credits they earn, not the credits they attempt. Employers pay people on the credentials they have, not the credentials they attempted. So if you look at the labor market data, students who have completed a credential are going to have a much brighter economic future than students who went through 3.5 years of a BA and dropped out. So it doesn't matter that you have 3.5 years. If the student has an associate's degree, they're going to earn more than you are, because you didn't stop along the way and get that credential. So back to the learner analytics, we have a bunch of different ways to find people. And I'm going to switch over and start showing you some of the ways that we use this data and what it might look like through. So dashboards, early alerts, identification of students. And this is the interesting thing. We have data. We have data in troves and volumes and reams, and we can bring it in here on a fork truck and drop it on a table and we'll crush it in a big dramatic way. Is it being used? So I had this conversation at our school, I'm ashamed to admit, where somebody kept going on and on and on about this data they needed, and they wanted this and they wanted that. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, it has to go in the annual report. And I said, but why? And they said, because it has to go in the annual report, because we've always done that. And I said, well, who's going to read the annual report? Well, probably nobody. So you want me to do a week's work to get you data so nobody can read it in an annual report? I don't think so. Because they're not using it. So it was, it was tough. I lost on that one. We ended up getting the data anyway, right? But that's the way things work. Is it being used by the right people? Do the people that actually on the front lines, that have an impact with a student, that make decisions, that actually do things, are they the ones using the data? Or is it the folks in the senior leadership that look at the data and go, wow, we have a problem? It needs to be all of those people, not just the people at the most leadership positions. It needs to be everybody so that they know they have a problem. They're the ones that are going to most innovate and figure out how to solve those problems. Culturally, people are ready. Systematically, there's not a lot of access. How many of you feel like you have enough data to do your job and that it's delivered in a timely fashion so that you can do your job? Integrated system. How many of you go to your IR group frequently to get a report and then it goes into a queue, and by the time you get your data back, it's no longer useful to you in the process that you needed it? Right. So, an advising or coaching dashboard. So this is not as whiz-bang as some of the commercial products. We focus more on numbers of data points instead of the dials and things. You can add dials and such if you like. I realize this is kind of hard to read now. Hopefully the big screens are better. This contains a wealth of information. This is step number one in these kinds of systems, which is to aggregate and combine all the data that your coaches and advisors, faculty, whoever's working with the student need in one place. How many of you feel like working with your SIS is complex? Did you have to go to multiple hours of training? Right. We wanted it to be very simple. There's some studies that have been done that a coach or an advisor spends as much as 25% of their time hunting for data. And so if you go and watch them frequently, they will have to turn their back to their student as they go onto the computer and they try to look for stuff. And then they flip their keyboard over to get another password to go into another system, and they write stuff on Post-its while they're looking all these things up to turn back to the student and work with them. How do we make this point and click? Right? How do we go through the tabs and make this much more simple? So you can see here we've got a lot of information: completion rates, past performance and terms, their academic plan, are they on and off plan, who's their academic advisor, have they done their financial aid, is their FAFSA on file, what's their academic standing, are they F1, what are the completion ratios, all this stuff in one spot. And now across the top, I don't know if you can really see it, but there are tabs there for all their transcripts, their placement scores, their contact information, so if they have a secondary residence, especially for those of you in DL, most of our SISs don't support the idea of two addresses at the same time. We're next to a large military base, right, Patterson. Our students end up all over the world, and trying to get a test proctor in Dayton, Ohio is much less complex than Doha. So if you don't know they're there, this is a problem. And finally, their coaches. I want to know who their coach is, when was the last time they interacted with them, and then everybody they've ever touched. All in one place. We also want to be able to have folks give us information. This is another form of the learner analytics, which is driving information or data from the faculty to us. And we want to make this as simple as possible. So we've integrated it with the LMS systems, so they can go straight off their roster or grade book and click very simplistic kind of forms, and then we can do back-end routing. If it requires 4 hours of training for your faculty to do an early alert, not going to happen. How many of you have adjuncts that teach one class on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, twice a year? Are you going to get that person to come in for 4 hours of early alert training? Unlikely, unless you pay them. Right? So this needs to be an email with 3 bullet points on it, like, hey, if you have a student that needs support, here's what you need to do. So what is the next step? So all of that represents data we really pretty much all probably have. We know this information, maybe we're not surfacing it, but we have it in some system somewhere. The next step is really what Tristan was talking about yesterday, which is the predictive modeling. And I'm not going to do like the 2-hour statistics class on how that stuff all works. But we really can, with high degrees of confidence, rank and score and predict a lot of different student behaviors. And there are a lot of different systems and tools out there in the nonprofit, open source, as well as vendor product space that you can take a look at. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to try to connect you. And when you get these slides, the last slide has a bunch of links in the notes section. It'll take you to a bunch of different places that you can look at this stuff. So with all of that said, knowing is not enough, right? So we have this coach dashboard, so we talked about that. So on the left there, we have all the students assigned to me. We can color code them, we can know who we're supposed to be working with, who has risk, who has open early alerts, you know, what am I doing, and who am I accountable for. We also have a lot of tools in these iPass systems to be able to do things that are tactical. So all these things on the left there are all these different search pivots. And the reason these things have value is that if you wanted to see all of your nursing students with less than a 2.0 GPA or greater than a 3.5 because you're going to give a specific scholarship, typically this is a request to IR. What I want is for this to spit out a list of students right now that I can tactically work with today, because I want to help my students that are first time in college, first term, earned less than 12 semester hours, and or have a GPA below 2.0, and now have a list of those students. Then I can tag those students and say, I want to watch these people as a cohort in the future. So I want to know what's going on with this group. Or maybe you have Achieving the Dream, or DEI, or any other grant that somebody pops in and says, hey, I want you to track students with blue hats. And you go, okay. But how are you going to do that? You need systems and tools to be able to tag those students and to be able to report on those students, find those students, and interact with those students. We also don't want you to have to detail in and out of all those records, right? So these systems are coming up with the concept of these dashboards or reports. In this case, we call it coaching history. This gives you a summary report of all the academic stuff, as well as all the interaction points. So like the lady using the integrated system, this is a review history in one screenshot. I mean, one button press, you press it, it shows you the student, and it shows you everybody that's touched it without having to go in and out of all the separate tools. This is really nice, so that when you're in Aruba, and I get your student, instead of having to go to 6 tools, I just go click, and I go, all right, sit down. Tell me about what you and Jennifer worked on Tuesday. I see she suggested this, and this is how this is going, et cetera, et cetera. Integrated communication, so that you don't have to leave the system to go send emails, and you can also track this and tag it to the system, and also the ability to set different confidentiality levels. We really don't want disability services, counseling services, academic advising, and faculty to have to use different tools. We've just created new data silos. But we also don't want to disrespect the students' privacy and HIPAA privacy, so we can very carefully control their roles, and almost all the systems have it at this point, so they can tier out the security. This is the ability to see the coach and what's been done with them, the ability to collect specific data. So do your registrars collect whether or not students have children? Would that be interesting to know as a coach or an advisor? How many kids? What shift do they work? Do they have a job? How many hours a week do they want to work? So we have the ability to collect a lot of data here that is tactical. Do you have a job? How do you think you're going to pay? And interestingly enough, we rarely ask students what their challenges are. We come to conferences, we decide what their challenges are, we go back to our schools and we try to fix them. And one of the things we like to do is ask the student, what do you think your challenges are to be successful? How are you going to pay for college? And then we actually look at that data. And the data becomes interesting. So the number one challenge that students self-identify in this process is Sinclair's finances, right? That's a given. What do you think the number 2 is? Somebody guess. Time? Interesting. Test anxiety. Right? It's interesting to get out of anecdote and start to get into data. Now that's not to say that that's the biggest challenge, but that's to say that's the biggest student perceived challenge. So then we can immediately, that's not analytics, that's just counting. We can say, okay, now let's change our orientation and our intake and offer more workshops and put it on the syllabus in the math classes that this is what you do to overcome, because that's where most of it's math. We want to be able to create value from our interactions. So we've created this concept called speed notes, and we want to be able to pre-scaffold all the different kinds of comments instead of being able to key a whole bunch of stuff in, so that if it's advising session 1, you already know what's already supposed to be there. This gets into being a little more prescriptive with the staff and having a uniform consistency of services, because you can pre-scaffold what was supposed to be done in session 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it also acts like a checklist. So if you've got new folks or part-time folks, they can still do whatever they want. I'm not saying we're trying to shoehorn them in, but it reminds them that these are all the things we should have done in session 1, and then instead of having to type all that, they can go click, 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 save. And now there's a record that those things were done with the student in session 1. The nice thing is that from an analytics perspective, I can go back and ask the system, how many students are in session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4? So now you can start to build ad hoc processes for different cohorts or groups or grants and say, okay, where are my students at, and how are they progressing through this, and how are the different people at different progression points doing, what are their success rates compared to others, and the students that fell out at session 3, how did they do compared to the students that persisted to session 5, et cetera, to start looking at our own processes and trying to understand, are we having the impact we think we're having? So I think a lot of systems drive value from just, we want to have notes so you know what other people have done, but there are more ways to drive value. Early alert, and we send the early alerts, but the most important thing about an early alert system is to close this feedback loop and make sure faculty feel honored, that if I feel like this is a black box and I send out an early alert and you never get back to me, you may, as a service provider, have spent 2 weeks chasing the student down, doing everything humanly possible, and you just couldn't get them. And if my experience as a faculty member is nobody did anything, because nobody ever called me to tell me or emailed me, then I'm going to be like, this thing wasn't worthwhile. So we've set it up in the system that when you work with it, it automatically emails the faculty member. Some people are like, well, I can't tell the faculty member, this is a private issue. It's not really true, right? It's a rule. But I can say, Tom, thank you for letting me know that Bill isn't doing well in your class. I'm working with him. I validated Tom. I've explained to them and expressed to them that I'm working on it, and I've told them nothing about Bill's privacy. Right? So we can have it both ways. Then we want to create action plans. We talked about earlier, I feel like this is the most important thing. All these other tools are for us. But what are the tools that are for the student? The student needs something to take away from this so that they can step forward. And so we want to create a plan of action. And this isn't really easy to read, but those are lists of resources this student can use to overcome specific barriers or challenges. So how do we do that? We have a knowledge base, or what we call the reference capital, of all the resources and supports at our institution and our community. How many of you have this in a comprehensive place that's searchable, indexed, and everybody can get to it on your campus? This is mighty handy. I recommend doing this no matter what other system stuff you do. This is nice. How many times have you heard a faculty member be like, I didn't know what to tell a student who wanted childcare in the evening? I didn't know we had that. Well, yeah, we do. And if you had a place where they could go and put it in and look through it, they'd be like, oh, hey, or put this in your student success course so they know it when they come on campus. This is pretty valuable. So what's that look like to a student? So this is our self-help interface. And they can go in and go through some questionnaires and get some advice, like an expert system kind of thing, and then contact their coach, they can see their academic plan, and they can just search for resources. And out there on the right are the action plan items that their coach has assigned to them. That's fantastic. So I've created a plan for Tom. And Tom's got these next 3 steps he's going to do. And he knows which academic courses he needs to take. So we're trying to cohesive that together. But we also want the student to start interacting, searching, and doing this stuff on their own and building some self-efficacy. So we do have all this searchable stuff. So they can go in and put in baby, or pop-up childcare, or bus, and transportation, etc. And you can see there we have 56 different challenge categories, hundreds of referral resources that we've built up over time. And then they can create their own plans of action. And then we can help them because we have insight into that, and then we can track their progress. So they're going to contribute. And we want to make this thing as pervasive as possible. How many of you write stuff down on a piece of paper and give it to the student, and it goes out the office door with them? Right? That's the typical kind of thing. So we want this plan to be there and then be tracked and pervasive. So we email it to them, we put it in the portal, we put it in the self-help interface, we put it on the mobile device, etc. So academic advising, how do we know what they, and when I say we, I mean the institution. Why is it a secret between one advisor and a student what the path to success is? That seems odd. Why don't we all know? How do the students know? And do they do it? So how do you measure that what your advisor told the student to do actually happened? Do any of you measure that specifically? I'm guessing we can't here, but everywhere else. So we want ideal pathways, and Tristan talked about this a little bit before, and we can go into it in more detail if you want, but I'm going to run out of time. We want a clear individual path for each student. We want to remind the student and everybody who works with the students, so we're going to show you this, that we give the faculty insight into their academic plans directly from their rosters. They should be completely engaged to know who the student's advisor is, so that the faculty member doesn't do something like, who on earth told you this? And the student says, the brown hair lady? How do you fix that, right? You can't fix that. So we've got to close that loop. Oh, this last thing. This one's a little bit controversial too. We can talk about this more if you want in the discussion. At Sinclair, we no longer do any advising that says anything like take a humanities. Not allowed. For the last 3 years. There are no things that say take 9 hours of social science or take 3 hours of humanities. We put something on the plan, and that default will work. And then we give them other options that they could also do if they don't like the default. This is interesting. There is a default bias. So the students do majoritarily pick the default, but it also gives them a path that they can't screw up. Or they have to choose to screw it up. So this is our academic planning tool, and it's really about documenting what an advisor told a student and driving value from that. There's tremendous value. So we have all these expert systems and degree audits and with Tristan's system, but I really want to know what Jennifer told Bill. Well, right? And why do I want to know that? Well, because later when Bill goes to register, I want to remind Bill what Jennifer said. When the chair of accounting needs to know how many people are going to be in this class, I don't want to try to deduce from all my data. I want to know that Jennifer told Bill to take accounting in fall 15. So now I have a list. And then if I close those sections, I want to know who those students are so I can call them. And right now, most of us, we lose value. It goes out the door. We write classes on a piece of paper in boxes, and we don't really keep them. Some folks scan them and put them in a document imaging system. This is really much more valuable. You don't really want to have to build them by scratch all over and over, so we take all these ideal pathways, and we have our chairs and our faculty work together with the advisors, and we've created the most healthy relationship between those two groups I've ever seen on our campus in almost 20 years that I've been there. And they go through and create an ideal pathway and create context as to why you would take these electives over these electives, and they write it in the notes and the margins and stuff, so that it's why I would take Western Civ over US history, because it fits with this thing. But if you're going to transfer here, I would take that, and it gives the advisors a much bigger fighting chance. We have 180 programs. A lot of programs know how to advise people. We take those, we create ideal pathways, and those templates can be brought in full-time and part-time and pre-populate, and then they tweak them to the individual students. The context has tremendous value. Why did you do this? So that as another advisor goes in to make changes, they understand what happened. We also put notes on here. Tristan talked about the students wanting to connect with subject matter. If you know how this social or sociology class is going to help you with casework later in your career, then suddenly it's not an elective. It's part of your career. And now you'll have a much deeper emotional connection to it. Hopefully you'll do better in it. We also have this philosophy, we pop up this financial aid calculator and transcripts right on that page. We can get it in other parts of the application, but what we hear advisors say is, gosh, I gotta go to another place, or I sit down, and so data when you need it. So we show that to the students as an academic plan with all the notes, and they can track their progress. Then when they go to register, we say, hey, you're not on plan, you should really talk to an advisor. And pop up the communication tool right there so we can put it in the system. If they're on plan, the default will lead to success. So we only show them the classes that they should be looking for instead of making them search our catalog for everything. Or making them figure out to plug in the numbers. We just say, hey, here are the 4 classes you should schedule. And then if they try to register for something that we didn't ask them to, say, hey, you're not registering for what we talked about. Are you sure you really want to do this? Prescriptive but not stringent. We still let them do it. You could lock this down, right? But then we have data. The advisors now know that these students haven't done what they were asked, and they can take action. We put this on the roster so that the faculty can be engaged with this and know who is on and off academic plan, who the advisors are, what classes they were asked to take, so they can be part of the success, and equipping them with the information they need to engage the students. And then we want to be able to report and measure on all of this. Did we do what we think we did? And we want to measure lots of different aspects of this. And I think probably at the bottom there is the thing that in higher ed we do the least of. We don't really know if our interventions are successful. We say, go to the tutoring center. Did that work? We assume, anecdote, years of gut feeling tells us that going to the tutoring center solved the problem. Well, if your failure on the first math test is because you're sleeping on your buddy's couch because you don't have a place, sending you to the tutoring center exacerbates the problem, not solves the problem. Right? Because, so it's not always certain that the advice we give by default is the right advice, and we don't really do the measurement. And so just like test anxiety being kind of
oh, that's an interesting. It'd be really nice if we could measure these things and know and get beyond anecdote. So we have a lot of reports built into the system, and you have all sorts of different reporting options for all these different tools. It will look and slice the dice the data. Simple things like how many early alerts. So this is interesting, right? Sinclair started this early alert thing, and I'll show you a chart here in a second. We've got about 5,000 early alerts a year. For us, that's a lot. Dr. Law Tuesday said 5,000 this term. We had 1 week with over 500 alerts, and I went, holy cow. So it's awesome to see that they have taken something that we started, and they're doing it better than we're doing it. And I'd like to come to them now and learn from them and look at their processes so that we can get better. So this is like our case counts, and then the reasons for early alerts. What classes did they come from? So now you can start tailoring things. I get all these early alerts in one type of math class, or one section of this, or from certain populations or demographics of students. Maybe I can start tailoring services. Or maybe I can just put stuff in the syllabus up front and have the faculty member talk about it on day one, that these kinds of things may come up. Here are the services and ports, because we can use the data to back into that. Performance management, this one can be a bit touchy, but how many of you actually know how many students all your advisors see, and how well that works, and how what the loading is, so that when you go to ask for more staff resources, and you can show things like, if we had 3 more coaches, we could probably save X number of more students. Tactical reports. I want to be able to run a report on all my students that I'm managing that have not yet registered, or have not paid, or have not filled out their FAFSA, or isn't on file and updated this year, or whatever it might be, so that I can take action now without calling IR and waiting 3 weeks. But I want to do something right now, this morning, so I can get on the phone and call these people and figure this out. Course capacity planning. How many of you just roll over whatever you did last year this time, and that's the courses we'll offer? And, Tristan talked about that yesterday too, if you don't sequence things right. And the idea of course fishing, you open a whole bunch of courses and you wait to see what people will enroll for and close the other ones. And then all these students just get disappointed. For them, it's disenfranchising. I signed up for something and you closed it. Or the advisor told me that next fall I could take this class. Chair doesn't offer it because they don't have the right person. And to the student, it feels like, oh gosh, they don't know what they're doing. They told me to do it and now it's not offered. To us, we're all individual little islands within the institution. To them, we're a monolith. If I say something, Jennifer should know that and be able to answer it, even though that's not really our reality. Data-driven decisions really are possible. You really can do process improvement, figure out your resource and ROI. You can use it both tactically and strategic. So you have to use the data. So I implore you that if you're going to spend the time to create and design reports, that you design them with the concept that you're going to use them to do something. Otherwise, you're just kind of spinning your wheels for the sake of having a report to take to a meeting. So if you're going to adopt one of these, the systems can work. I really do believe this. I think there's really good evidence, and then what we're doing out in space now, culture is the #1 key. If I go in someplace and this is top down and everybody's, I don't want to, it's not going to work. Culture is more important than tech. Right? The tech part can be work, but it's known work. We understand how to do systems and pull data, but if people won't use it, if they won't embrace it, and if you try to skirt engagement by using technology, you're just pushing the problem down the road. You still have the problem. You got to have engagement. So you really have to have those things, and that's a leadership thing. So if your leadership really engages, so here at St. Pete they do a Wednesday morning meeting every week where the president and the provosts and a whole bunch of folks get on the phone and they all update each other on all their metrics around student success, so there's present, constant. This is a real leadership commitment to success and using data. And they have the frontline people do the reporting, so it's not the executives reporting in. It's the coach or the advisor or the person running the service, and they talk about the early alerts. And they say, this is how they're working. And then they say, this is how I'm going to make them better. Half hour, once a week, senior level buy-in, the president always attends. Pretty powerful. And they have the improvements to back that up, that it does work. So what would your next steps be? I see so many people start into these systems with no goals. We need a system. We're going to get an early alert system. I would say, why?
The reason I say that is I've gone to many colleges and they're like, we want these automated systems, we want analytics, and analytics is going to tell us who all the students are. And I say, okay, if I had a list of 500 students and I slid it across the table right now, what would you do with it? How many of you would be prepared to deal with 500 alerts right now? Right? So you have to build capacity. And you have to have the culture that would allow you to use those alerts or to use the data before you invest all that money in tech. Now, there's a cart and horse thing, right? If you don't know that students need help, will you help them? But at the same time, if you're not prepared to make that commitment, sometimes this is just angst. I now know 500 students are at risk and I can help 30 of them. I feel bad. You know, so you've got to do both at the same time. And to me, this is always harder than putting in the system. We have always got to throttle these early alerts and other kinds of interventions to match our capacity. And that last piece, train and communicate broadly. Frequently, too, these systems go in, but then people don't know the system exists. I bet all of you have interventions on your campuses that you don't know are even there because the people who run those interventions don't really publicize them. And it's not intentional, it's just the way, you know, or we had a big campaign 2 years ago, but what happened to all the faculty that have joined since then? I have no idea. So treat this as a process, not an event. It is not a project. You are not going to complete it. It is never going to be over, both from a system and a cultural and organizational perspective. You have to just accept that. It's here to stay, and you've got to embrace it and just keep going with it. If you think we're going to be done in spring 15, we're going to have the best system ever and it'll work for always, probably not going to be the case. So thank you for your patience, and like I said, I have some of the slides and things linked, and the eCar report is really, really valuable. The Community College Research Center has some really nice reports. eCar is also coming out with a readiness instrument that they're going to make available for free in September for help people try to figure out where they are and figure out where the gaps are to help them to ease into these transitions. So thanks, folks.
Thank you, Russ. We're going to actually take a couple of questions and then maybe go directly into our coffee break so we can stay on schedule. So, Russ, before you go.
Oh, questions?
Yeah, do we have any questions?
I thought you were
for Russ?
shooting me off stage.
No, not at all. I'm sure you have some questions.
So, Russ, do you have any sense of what, and it's probably an ROI calculation here, but what's the cost of the puppy?
That's a really good question, right? That's a fair question. It really depends on what breed you want. It depends on how deep you're going to do this. Most people start into these kind of systems piloting. You know, they have a group or a grant, and then those things are the impetus for doing this. We're seeing more strategic, big picture stuff. You're in for 50 to 150 grand or something, almost any system kind of thing that you're going to be looking at, and either in terms of internal staff or external vendor or some combination thereof. People like to think that if you go to IT and ask them to do stuff, it's free. After working in IT for a long time, I can tell you it's not free. If I have to assign 2 programmers to it for a long time, that's 200 grand, you know. So there's a cost somewhere. However, I think the strategic importance to institutions, we could be spending millions of dollars on this and still probably be where we need to be strategically. So I think right now people are counting pennies and maybe being not seeing that if we don't improve these things strategically long term. It's funny, we'll build a building and we'll gladly pay the utilities and the janitorial and all that stuff on that building forever. And that's not like a strategic thing, but if you ask for the same amount of money to help students, then people are like, well, I don't know, that's an ongoing cost. Sorry, that's soapbox material, I suppose. It's frustrating sometimes.
Can I ask a follow-up on John's question? That I imagine, though, that if you can calculate the ROI of the number of students retained as a result of the investment in feeding and caring for the puppy, then you can make a pretty good business case for why that investment's worth it.
I believe you can. Some people are really, really uncomfortable with this. Academics are frequently like, well, that isn't the point. That's not what we do. CFOs aren't. They're very comfortable. The challenge is, and the reason I wouldn't give you a number for what I would calculate my ROI is your environment is different. And I wouldn't want to tell you that this is the number because I don't know what all the variables will be when you get here, and you may not get
get that number. But once you have a system in place and you start looking at stuff, you would have your own benchmark to then have a very good ROI model to know which pieces do make sense and which things you should do more of and which kinds of roles you should hire more of, or where, the scary part, maybe places where we should cut back. This is one of the hardest things in higher ed, is that nobody ever wants to give up their thing, even if their thing is totally ineffective. Or maybe you have something that's wildly effective, but it's not cost effective. Right? If you have one person working with a group of 50 students, and those 50 students are doing fabulously, can you scale that compared to working with 500 students? And so sometimes there are things that really, really do work, but when you start looking at the numbers that, if you're paying $20,000 a student to keep them in school, then it's just never, the math's never going to work.
We'll take one more question.
Somebody's got it.
Or not. Got one back.
Hi, hello again, everybody. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I wonder how you control for this not just being more attention paid to students. Because, like I said yesterday, I'm faculty, right? And so on that small of a scale, it's obvious that my time and attention tends to produce greater results, right? And especially once I've been teaching online classes, and getting that same personal attention and time devoted to students, I find to be a big challenge. So it seems like a lot of what you're talking about and what some of the other folks have talked about with these advising systems comes down to giving students more attention, more help. Now, I don't know if it's just is the technology mimicking that, or is there something completely aside of it, right? Like even with your kids, right? You pay more attention to your one kid, and you love them, and you support them, they're probably going to do better than the kid that you ignore their whole life. So this is what I think.
Glad I wasn't born into your family. No, totally, and I understand what you're saying. And I'm not sure that I'm trying to say that the technology is magic. I think that the relationships are key. I think that I can use the technology so that you can do things more easily. I think there are probably ways that we could allow you to have more relationships with more students. And in our online program, some of these auxiliary services allow the faculty to unload certain kinds of challenges to support people who then case manage. And our faculty group, our distance learning group has done some great things and won some awards for their processes in supporting people in CDE and regular DL, et cetera, by having the faculty member have some resources they can turn to and say, hey, this student has expressed concerns about their housing situation. This is really not my area of expertise. Can you help them? And so giving you more chance to teach and not deal with certain kinds of things so that you can spend more time doing what it is you love doing and what it is where you provide the most value to the student and sharing it with other folks. The technology does help. So like Tristan's stuff, having great advising systems that pre-select courses allows an advisor to spend less time hunting through the catalog, which means I can actually have a greater human impact faster. So that means I can actually advise more students with higher quality because the system's going to kick out, ideal pathways with really high accuracy on ways to get them through the curriculum so that I can spend more time talking about where do you want to be in life? What kind of job do you really want? What are you passionate about? Instead of, well, Wednesday morning we think we can get you into, because that's, because we're dealing with tactical stuff. So we can get the technology to offload some of the tactical stuff so that we can make these human interactions more powerful. I personally don't think the technology will ever completely replace the human interaction. I think that would be the wrong way to go. I think it's to power you and to try to take care of the rote stuff that you don't, you know what I mean? To try to make it faster and easier and help you identify which student really needs your attention and when.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
All right, so what I would worry about is, thanks.
So things would, right, like you said, if you can give them the advice they need 10 minutes, then you can spend 50 minutes talking about what you really want to be in life. Now, I would ask you all to consider how realistic you think that model will continue to be over time. Or will it be the case that there will be pressure to deal with 5 students in an hour or 6 students in an hour because in 10 minutes you can get them through the line? because the technology allows us to put them in the right classes. So that seems like a potential issue, and I would wonder what your thoughts about how you.
I think it could be a potential issue, but I think there is a balance. I think we need to see more students with the resources we have now. We are not terribly efficient, and there is room to see more students in the time we have available today. There is a break point where that becomes negative, right? And I think that's what you're describing there, is when does this become a mill versus a human interaction? I hope that's not what we do. I hope what we do is we shrink an hour session to 45 minutes because I don't spend the 25% of my time hunting for data. And then I can see an extra student every day, right? And that's where I hope we go. But I can see what you're saying is that somebody might want to tend to say, well, we'll use this as a staff reduction method and we'll put more work on fewer people. It actually tends to me to work out the other way around. People get the data and then the staffs actually get bigger.
I mean, I assume most of us would the same thing, but I worry more about the purse strings, right? Hey, do you really need, can you just do more with this, and then we can take this money and you can do something else with it?
I would flip that conversation, and I heard this yesterday too. I heard a lot of questions about how, well, I'm worried why can't we do this on campus? Flip that the other way and say, what is the opportunity? Because I think you can open the purse strings if you have data to show that what you're doing is effective, to add more faculty or to add more advisors or coaches. But if you don't have data to make a case, the CFO and the leadership are never going to give you those additional resources. And if you don't have a system so that you can measure and have the data to make a case, you'll never get there. And then you'll end up with, I don't know that you really need another $50,000 because you're not showing me anything tangible. And so I assume you can do it with 40 or 30 or 20 because you're not communicating the value you're really bringing because you don't have the data. Do you see where I'm going with that? So I ask you all to flip that conversation. Instead of thinking about the ways this won't work on your campus, think about the ways you can do so. What can we do? And then how can we use it to the other way around? How can we use it to justify our resources?
Is it on? I'd like to make some comments sort of from the perspective of experience in this area. Our campus went out, approached an integrated system to decrease the amount of time an advisor would have to spend with a student and inconsistent information across units. And really it was a matter of people are being inefficient, let's get more efficient. It was all focused on advising and services around campus. We've had our system in place now, I don't know, 10, 12 years. We've reached degrees of perfection that I can't even discuss about how well the system is working on the advising side and giving accurate and consistent information to students. The problem, we're looking at a new level, if you will. It's like we've evolved to a new problem. The culture that you talk about is important, but the first time you implement one of these systems, everyone sees it as a silver bullet. We're going to put it in place and it's going to save everything. Retention rates are going to go up, graduation rates are going to go up, everything's going to be perfect. So all the responsibility comes down to the advisors and the service units. We achieved a level of success that was apparent very quickly. So we got that great return on investment right away, but now we're kind of in a level plane. And now the institution's looking at it going, well, how come we're not up at the next level? And I think the culture of our institution is now starting to look inward. The faculty are now starting to look at the data and say, oh, these students are not being successful in these courses, and when we look at their demographics, it's because they all work they're working full time, they're only coming to school a very short period of time. They want to have workshops, but we offer our workshops from 9 to 10 in the morning, but they all work. If we offered them from 8 to 9 at night, everyone could come. So the faculty are now starting to look at it and say, oh, maybe some of it is our responsibility. Maybe redesigning our curriculum the way Tristan was talking yesterday. But that doesn't happen on day one.
No.
That happens after you've gotten rid of what everyone thinks is a silver bullet, which is looking to advising to save the world. And I think most of your institutions feel that way. We'll put the pressure on advising, they will save us, and everything will be wonderful. And so we're starting to get into this new culture, and it's kind of exciting to see we have a contract with construction and communication, so we're starting to have coaches in classrooms. we're looking at those kinds of things that we hadn't even thought about years ago because it was all about the advisor saving.
Right. So this is one of the most important things, right? It's a process, not an event. And you will, that's what I said. It's not going to on day one give you X number of percentage retention, but it gave you a scaffolding so that you could solve some problems, move beyond them, culturally embrace bigger issues, and have deeper conversations, and get to some things that are more core, curricular or other things. And I think that's the value, right? But again, I don't believe it's a silver bullet either. I think it's a starting place. But if you don't have the ability to measure and understand and really track what people actually do, then people are all in conjecture land. They're telling anecdote instead of saying, okay, well, that's really what we do, and why didn't the students do better? And so when we did our ideal pathways, we basically had a leadership commitment to say, you will sit down and discuss the electives that best fit in your program, period. And it forced a conversation. And advising and faculty got together and hashed it out. For 180 programs, this took time. But now we've institutionalized it. It'll happen every year. That advising and academics will sit down on every program and go through the best way for students to get through it. But we would have never got there if we hadn't cleaned up some of the underlying issues.
Well, I think we're about out of time, so please join me in thanking Russ Little. So we're going into a coffee break right now.